these people had one thing in common. They knew they had it in themselves. They knew they could be something beyond where they were. They were willing to put their time, their energies to better themselves. What you really could do with more skills, it's just remarkable. So I would like to just tell you a couple of short stories, and we'll draw maybe a couple of lessons from them. I would like to tell you of two women that each sold a business to Berkshire Hathaway, to me actually, for many, many, many millions of dollars. Both of them started with $2,500. By a coincidence, it was the exact same amount. It was everything they had in the world. And one of them was a woman who landed in Seattle in 1917, couldn't speak a word of English, had a tag around her neck. The tag said Fort Dodge, Iowa. The Red Cross got her to Fort Dodge, where she was reunited with her husband who had come to the country a couple of years earlier. And she lived in Fort Dodge for 2 years. And as she put it, she felt like a dummy. She couldn't pick up the language. She couldn't learn a word. And so she and her husband decided to move to Omaha. So they came to Omaha in 1919. And there she found a small colony of Russian Jews, so she started feeling more at home. And then as her oldest daughter went to school, she would come home, this daughter, Frances, and she would teach her mother the words she'd learned in school that day. And this woman, Rose Blumpkin, spent 20 years saving money, bringing first her siblings over, her mother and father, $50 at a time. She sold used clothing to do it. She had 4 children during this period. And by 1937, after 20 years, she'd saved $2,500. She went to Chicago and she bought what she could of furniture. Her dream had always been to open a furniture store. And this woman who had never gone to school one day in her life, with $2,500, but with the same spirit that the people in this room had about having a dream and working to accomplish that dream, she built a business which she sold to me in 1983 for $60 million approximately, and which did $1.5 billion worth of business last year. The 4th generation is working in that business. This woman, Rose Blumpkin, she worked for me until she was 103. And then she retired and she died the next year, which is a lesson to all of Berkshire's managers that premature retirement, you can't tell what's going to happen. But Mrs. B, with her $2,500, one further fact about her, she could not read or write. And she went into a furniture business, and she didn't bring anything unique in furniture, but she brought a determination to succeed. She knew she could outwork anyone else. She knew she cared about her customers. She worked at very low gross margins, but she built this incredible business. And I saw one other woman who did a similar thing with $2,500. I paid her hundreds of millions of dollars for her business. So I decided to go to the source and get these people before, I don't want you guys coming around to me asking me hundreds of millions of dollars. I'd like to join in with you much earlier. So I've followed this group. And today I'd like to tell you about one other small business person. This person, I went to buy his business from him, and he turned me down, which was very wise. But this was a fellow who was born about 8 years before I was. He was born in 1922. We'll call him Jack, lived in the Midwest. He was a pretty good athlete, didn't like school much. And I'm going to tell you one thing early in the story. Maybe you can figure out who the guy was. The company he built hires more college graduates each year than any other company in the United States. And this fellow, who was destined for this but did not know it, Jack, went to college for a year and then dropped out. He really wasn't that interested in school. And the year he dropped out was 1941. And when the the United States became under attack, he went down to the Army Air Force recruiting station, volunteered, and they turned him down because he had hay fever. So he went over to the Navy and again volunteered, and they took him. They put him on an aircraft carrier. He flew small fighter airplanes during World War II, got 2 distinguished flying crosses from the Navy, and then he came back to the Midwest. So now we've got a young guy. Probably by this time he would be 23 or 24 years old. And the interesting thing is, he got back to the Midwest, and he actually kind of went from one job to another for a short period of, or not such a short period of time. And he finally became a used car salesman at a Cadillac dealership in St. Louis, Missouri. And at age 35, having moved up in the organization, the sales organization, he said to his boss, "Could I go into car leasing business with you?" The boss said, "Well, if you'll cut your salary in half and you'll come up with, I think it was $25,000, which he borrowed, we can become partners in a car leasing company." So my friend Jack started at age 35 in the car leasing business. And he had 7 cars. It was pretty slow. In fact, one of the things he did was whenever the phone rang, he let it ring 3 or 4 times so people would think that he was very busy answering other phones. And of course, it was the only call he was going to get all day. So his first venture was okay, but it wasn't really going to go anyplace. And there's a lesson in this for all of us. At age 40, he decided, with 17 vehicles, 17 cars, he was going to go into competition in the rent-a-car business. So now he's taking on Hertz and Avis and National and people like that who have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of cars. And he's got 17 cars, and his cars aren't any different than theirs. I mean, he's buying them from General Motors or Ford or Chrysler. And he can't get the airport locations. Those companies have them all sold up. But he was determined that he would basically offer the customer, can't offer him a different car, but he can offer him friendlier service than they've ever seen. And so he started a company. He named it after the battleship that he'd flown from in the Pacific, which was the USS Enterprise. And he died about a year and a half ago. But when he died, his rent-a-car company, starting with those 17 cars, was worth more than Hertz and Avis and all the rest of the rental cars put together. The man's name was Jack Taylor, and his son, Andy Taylor, is a good friend of mine, runs the business now. A grandchild is in the business. There'll probably be a 4th generation along the line. So this man, in the United States, he didn't invent artificial intelligence. You know, he didn't do anything that, just like Mrs. B selling furniture, I mean, that any one of us could have entered those businesses. But he lived by the creed, basically, of delighting his customers and working with people and establishing the relationship with them so that they in turn would want to delight the customers. He couldn't go out there and take care of every rental car possibility, but he learned how to project himself and his attitude toward his fellow man and his desire, to make a friend out of every customer. He managed to take very ordinary cars and turn them into this extraordinary business from virtually nothing. And it illustrates several points. One is, you don't necessarily get it right exactly right the first time. I mean, the car leasing business, basically you were competing on the cost of money to finance cars. And it's very hard to delight a customer when you just give them the car and tell them to send you a monthly check for 5 years and you'll be back at that time. So his talents were being wasted basically in that business. But at the age of 40, with all of that experience behind him, he found the golden key. He took a very ordinary business and turned it into an absolutely extraordinary operation, just like Mrs. B or Rose Blumpkin did with furniture. And he didn't worry about whether the Federal Reserve was going to tighten or ease. He didn't worry about whether the stock market was up or down yesterday. He didn't worry about the things he couldn't change, but he did focus on the one thing he could change, and that was the customer's experience. And I have seen the one that got away, Enterprise. I went down to Florida and tried to talk him into selling to Berkshire, and he was smart enough not to do it. Probably the value of the company has quadrupled since I made that visit. But he was smart enough to see that he would find that business. Henry Ford, as you may know, failed twice before he started the Ford Motor Company in 1903. I mean, the test isn't whether you get the greatest business idea in the world the first time out. The test is whether you keep learning as you go along what your strengths are and what you can do for your customers, what you can bring especially to the party. And to do that, you need the education that I know you've received through 10,000 small businesses, but you need a genuine desire day in, day out to delight the customer. I've never seen a business, and I've seen a lot of businesses, but I've never seen one that delights the customer that doesn't succeed. I mean, what you want is that customer the next day when they think, do I want to rent a car or do I want to buy some furniture? What goes through their mind? You know, it's the place where they've had a great experience. I don't know what I paid for this tie. Actually, probably if somebody gave it to me, but for the purposes of the speech, I will say I have no idea. But or the shirt I'm wearing, or this. But I do know, I will remember how I was treated when I bought it. I mean, you long forget about the price, but you never forget whether you had a good experience or a poor experience with the purchase experience. And you'll have a hard time finding a person that's had a wonderful experience, a delighted experience in purchasing anything that isn't going to come back. And similarly, if the memory is of rudeness, indifference, whatever it may be, they're never going to come back. And as a small business owner, and as you grow, you have to not only be able to project that interest in people's well-being, in delighting them yourself, but you have to do it through other people. And you won't be able to do it through people who themselves do not feel they're being fairly treated, that their views aren't appropriately considered. So you really do have to learn to multiply yourself through other people. And I advise the young people that come to Omaha. We have a number of classes. The key is to, certainly in terms of your personal life, the most important decision you'll make is the spouse that most of you will likely have. And it's very important to surround yourself with people that are better than you are. You are going to move in the direction of the people you associate with. So you constantly, I've been enormously lucky in that respect. I mean, I've just had teachers and friends and a spouse that really was a better person than I was. And I had enough sense to learn from these people that life went better if you behave better yourself. It took a while. So I advise you to seek out, as your partner in business, your partner in life, whatever it may be, look for the people that actually are examples to you rather than somebody that you think you need to straighten out yourself. And simple rules like that, delighting customers, working through other people, associating with people that will cause you to move in a better path than you might otherwise have. They will take you so far in life that it's hard to believe. I mean, they took Rose Blumpkin without being able to speak a word of English, couldn't read or write, and they took her to what is now a $1.5 billion business. And incidentally, there's been no money put in it since the $2,500. That's been the total capital paid into the Nebraska Furniture Mart. And I think if you looked at Enterprise, I don't know their books the same way, but my guess is that very little equity capital has been added to Enterprise over the years. The business built on itself. So I want to tell you, I admire this group enormously. When I met Dr. Mello's class on September 22nd, 8 years ago, I was thrilled. And I admire people that are doing what you have done. Working hard at your job at the same time, you took on an added, really, lot of hard work to further your skills. 99% graduate. I mean, that's a mind-blowing statistic. And I'm looking at 2,200 people here who I admire. I'm cheering for you, and I can tell you the best is yet to come. Thank you.
Who's winning in this economy right now?
The rich. Guys like me. We have gone from having 93 billion, top 400, in 1982 to having 2.4 trillion, 25 for 1. It becomes a more and more specialized market economy. It was an agrarian economy a couple hundred years ago. It's very hard, to get 20 times the wealth of the next guy because you were a little bit better farmer. But if you're better at some skills now, you can become incredibly wealthy at a very young age, not because you've earned the money to build one steel mill and then saved it to buy another steel mill. So you get the capitalized value of an idea. And so the wealth moves big time, even on an anticipatory basis.
Show you. So he's not going to be one.
This is my new one.
What?
It's going to take.
I just turned in the one Alexander Graham Bell gave me. But,
Okay. So the question is, the business models are changing, the world are changing. The new technology, they're changing everything. There's no way you can just stay out of it and stay with the traditional. Now, for the private investors, especially in the venture capital industry, what would you think is the most important thing, the key in evaluating a company? I'm not asking about doing mediocre, I'm not asking about being average, but about excellent, remarkable. Just name one thing.
The most important thing is to be able to define which ones you can come to an intelligent decision on and which ones are beyond your capacity to evaluate. You don't have to be right about thousands and thousands and thousands of companies. You only have to be right about a couple. I met Bill Gates on July 5th, 1991. We were out in Seattle, and Bill said, "You've got to have a computer." And I said, "Why?" And he said, he said, "You can do your income tax on it." I said, "I don't have any income. Berkshire doesn't pay a dividend." He said, "Well, you can keep track of your portfolio." And I said, "I only have one stock." I said, and he says, "It's going to change everything." And I said, "Well, will it change whether people chew gum?" And he said, "Well, probably not." And I said, "Well, will it change what kind of gum they chew?" And not. And I said, "Well, then I'll stick to chewing gum and you stick to computers, I don't have to understand all kinds of business. There's all kinds of business I don't understand. But there's thousands of opportunities there. I did understand the Bank of America, and I'll be able, I'm able to do that. I'm able to understand some given percentage. But Ted Williams wrote a book called The Science of Hitting. And in The Science of Hitting, he's got a diagram, shows him at the plate. And he's got the strike zone divided into 77 squares, each the size of a baseball. And he says, if I only swing at pitches in my sweet zone, which he shows there, and he has what his batting average would be, which is 400. If he had to swing at low outside pitches, but still in the strike zone, his average would be 230. He said the most important thing in hitting is waiting for the right pitch. Now, he was at a disadvantage because if the count was 0-2 or 1-2 or so on, even if that ball was down where he was only going to bat 230, he had to swing at it. In investing, there's no called strikes. People can throw Microsoft at me and, you name it, any stock, General Motors, and I don't have to swing. And nobody's going to call me out on called strikes. I only get a strike called if I swing at a pitch and miss. So I can wait there and look at thousands of companies day after day, and only when I see something I understand and when I like the price at which it's selling, then if I swing, if I hit it, fine. If I miss it, it's a strike. But it's an enormously advantageous game. And it's a terrible mistake to think you have to have an opinion on everything. You only have to have an opinion on a few things. In fact, I've told students, if when they got out of school, they got a punch card with 20 punches on it, and that's all the investment decisions they got to make in their entire life, they would get very rich because they would think very hard about each one. And you don't need 20 right decisions to get very rich. 4 or 5 will probably do it over time. So I don't worry too much about the things I don't understand. If you understand some of these businesses that are coming along and can spot things on, if you can spot on Amazon, for example, I mean, it's a tremendous accomplishment what Jeff Bezos has done. And I tip my hat to him. He's a wonderful businessman. He's a good guy, too. But could I have anticipated that he would be the success and 10 others wouldn't be? I'm not good enough to do that. But fortunately, I don't have to. I don't have to form an opinion on Amazon. And I did form an opinion on the Bank of America, and I formed an opinion on Coca-Cola. I mean, Coca-Cola's been around since 1886. There's 1.8 billion 8-ounce servings of Coca-Cola products sold every day. Now, if you take 1 penny and get 1 penny extra, that's $18 million a day. And 18 million times 365 is 7 billion, 3 less 730 billion, or $6,570 million. So annually, $6,570 million from 1 penny. Do you think Coca-Cola is worth a penny more than Joe's Cola? I think so. So, and I've got about 127 years of history that would indicate it. So those are the kind of decisions I like to make. And you may have an entirely different field of expertise than I would have, and probably much more up to date in terms of the kind of businesses that we're seeing evolve. And you can get very rich if you just understand a few of them and understand their future. But fortunately, I don't have to. I mean, if we go into Heinz, and I look at people pouring ketchup on, hamburgers and potatoes, I don't think it's going to change. And the nice thing about it, some products travel. Some products don't travel. Candy bars don't travel well. I mean, if you look at the Cadbury bars in England, they don't sell well here. And if you look at the Hershey bars here, they don't sell as well someplace else. Soft drinks travel, and ketchup travels. I like products that travel.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Warren.
Good morning, Mr. Buffett, Mr. Munger. My name is JC. I am 11 years old and I come from China. This is my second year at the meeting. Mr. Munger, it's great to see you again after the Daily Journal meeting in February. Mr. Buffett, you mentioned that the older you get, the more you understood about human nature. Could you elaborate more about what you've learned? And how can the differences of human nature help you make a better investment? I would also like Mr. Munger to comment on that, please. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Well, you should wait for Charlie's answer because he's even older. He can tell you more about being old than I can even. It's absolutely true that virtually any yardstick you use, I'm going downhill. And if I would take a SAT test now and you could compare it to a score of when I was in my early 20s, I think it'd be quite embarrassing. And it's certainly, Charlie and I can give you a lot of examples, and there's others we won't tell you, about how things decline as you get older. But I would say this: it's absolutely true, in my view, that you can and should understand human behavior better
as you do get older. You just have more experience with it. And I don't think you can read. Charlie and I read every book we could on every subject we were interested in, when we were very young. And we learned an enormous amount just from studying the lives of other people. But I don't think you can really, you can get to be an expert on human behavior at all by reading books, no matter what your IQ is, no matter who the teacher is. And I think that you really do learn a lot about human behavior. Sometimes you have to learn it by having multiple experiences. I actually think despite all the other shortcomings, and I can't do mental arithmetic as fast as I used to, and I can't read as fast as I used to, but I do think that I know a lot more about human behavior than I did when I was 25 or 30.
If you want one mantra, it comes from a Chinese gentleman who just died, Lee Kuan Yew, who was the greatest nation builder probably that ever lived in the history of the world. And he said one thing over and over and over again all his life: figure out what works and do it. You just go at life with that simple philosophy from your own national group, you will find it works wonderfully well. Figure out what works and do it.
And figuring out what works means figuring out how other people behave.
Of course.
And Charlie and I have seen the extremes in human behavior, and in so many unexpected ways. And
now we get it every night.
Yeah.
Extremes of human behavior.
Yeah.
All you got to do is turn on the television.
Yeah. I'm glad he used that example.
Warren Buffett, known today as the world's greatest investor. If you had put $1,000 in his investing company when he first initiated it, it would be worth over $17 million today. Now, how did Warren Buffett achieve such a high return? It all came through smart investing and sticking to some key investing principles. I'm going to let Warren Buffett show you them.
I mean, we look for three things when we hire people. We look for intelligence, we look for initiative or energy, and we look for integrity. And if they don't have the latter, the first two will kill you. Because if you're going to get somebody without integrity, you want them lazy and dumb. I mean, you don't want them smart and energetic. So the answer is that investors behave in very human ways, which is they get very excited during bull markets, and they look in the rearview mirror and they say, I made money last year, I'm going to make more money this year, so this time I'll borrow, or the neighbor says, I wasn't in last year when that neighbor was dumber than I made a lot of money, so I'm going to go in this year. So they're always looking in the rearview mirror. And when they look in the rearview mirror and they see a lot of money having been made in the last few years, they plow in and they just push and push and push on prices. And when they look in the rearview mirror and they see no money having been made, they just say, this is a lousy place to be. So they don't care what's going on in the underlying business. And it's astounding, but that makes for huge opportunity, just huge opportunity. I've been taught by Ben Graham to buy things on a quantitative basis. Look around for things that are cheap. And that I was taught that, we'll say in 1949 or 50. It made a big impression on me. So I went around looking for what I call used cigar butts of stocks. And the cigar butt approach to buying stocks is that you walk down the street and you're looking around for cigar butts, and you find this on the street, this terrible looking, soggy, ugly looking cigar, one puff left in it. But you pick it up and you get your one puff. It's disgusting, you throw it away, but it's free. I mean, it's cheap. And then you look around for another soggy, one puff cigarette. Well, that's what I did for years. It's a mistake. Although you can make money doing it, but you can't make it with big money. It's so much easier just to buy wonderful businesses. So now I would rather buy a wonderful business at a fair price than a fair business at a wonderful price. I have an old-fashioned belief that I should expect to make money in things that I understand. And when I say understand, I don't mean understand, what the product does or anything like that. I mean understand what the economics of the business are likely to look like 10 years from now or 20 years from now. I know, in general, what the economics of, say, Wrigley chewing gum will look like 10 years from now. The internet isn't going to change the way people chew gum. It isn't going to change which gum they chew. You know, if you own the chewing gum market in a big way, and you've got Double Mint and Spearmint and Juicy Fruit, those brands will be there 10 years from now. So I can't pinpoint exactly what the numbers are going to look like on Wrigley, but I'm not going to be way off if I try to look forward on something like that. That evaluating that company is within what I call my circle of competence. I understand what they do, I understand the economics of it, I understand the competitive aspects of the business. The biggest mistakes we've made by far, I've made, not we've made, biggest mistakes I've made by far are mistakes of omission and not commission. I mean, it's the things I knew enough to do, they were within my circle of competence, and I was sucking my thumb. And that is really, those are the ones that hurt. They don't show up anyplace. I probably cost Berkshire at least $5 billion, for example, by sucking my thumb 20 years ago or close to it when Fannie Mae was having some troubles, and we could have bought the whole company for practically nothing. And I don't worry about that if it's Microsoft because I don't know it. Microsoft isn't in my circle of competence. And so I don't have any reason to think I'm entitled to make money out of Microsoft or out of cocoa beans or whatever. But I did know enough to understand Fannie Mae, and I blew it. And that never shows up under conventional accounting. But I know the cost of it. I know. You know, I passed it up. And those are the big, big mistakes. And I've had plenty of them. And unless I tell you about them in the annual report, and I resist the temptation sometimes, unless I tell you about them in the annual report, you're not going to know it because it doesn't show up under conventional accounting. But omission is way bigger than commission. There's big opportunities in life have to be seized. We don't do very many things, but when we get the chance to do something that's right and big, we've got to do it. And even to do it in a small scale is just as big a mistake almost as not doing it at all. I mean, you've really got to grab them when they come, because you're not going to get 500 great opportunities. In terms of our wholly owned businesses, we're not going to sell no matter how much anybody offers us for them. I mean, if somebody offers us 3 times what something is worth at See's Candy, the Buffalo News, Borsheim's, whatever it may be, we're not going to sell it. I may be wrong in having that approach. I know I'm not wrong if I owned 100% of Berkshire because that's the way I want to live my life. I've got all the money I could possibly need. You know, it just amounts to a change in the newspaper story on my obituary and the amount of money that the foundation has. And to break off relationships with people I like and people that have joined me because they think it's a permanent home, to do that simply because somebody waves a big check at me would be like selling one of my children because somebody waved a big check. So I won't do that. And I want to tell my partners I won't do it so that they're not disappointed in me. More and more with certain stocks, we've got that approach. Now, if we were chronically short of funds and had all kinds of opportunities coming, we might have a somewhat different approach. But our inclination is not to sell things unless we get really discouraged perhaps with the management, or we think the economic characteristics of the business change in a big way. I mean, and that happens. So, but we're not going to sell simply because it looks too high, in all likelihood. I mean, you can't make that 100%. So now let's go over here.
Hello, Mr. Buffett. I got 2 short questions. One is, how do you find intrinsic value in a company?
Well, intrinsic value is the number that if you were all-knowing about the future and could predict all the cash that a business would give you between now and Judgment Day, discounted at the proper discount rate, that number is what the intrinsic value of a business is. In other words, the only reason for making an investment and laying out money now is to get more money later on, right? That's what investing is all about. Now, when you look at a stock, when you look at a bond, assuming it's the United States government bond, it's very easy to tell how much you're going to get back. It says it right on the bond. It says when you get the interest payments. It says when you get the principal. So it's very easy to figure out the value of a bond. It can change tomorrow if interest rates change. But the cash flows are printed on the bond. The cash flows aren't printed on a stock certificate. That's the job of the analyst, is to print out, change that stock certificate, which represents an interest in the business, and change that into a bond and say, this is what I think it's going to pay out in the future. When we buy, some new machine for Shaw to make carpet, That's what we're thinking about, obviously, and you all learn that in business school. But it's the same thing for a big business. If you buy Coca-Cola today, the company is selling for about $110 to $15 billion in the market. The question is, if you had 110 or 15 billion, you wouldn't be listening to me, but I'd be listening to you incidentally. But the question is, would you lay it out today to get what the Coca-Cola company is going to deliver to you over the next 200 or 300 years? The discount rate doesn't make much difference after as you get further out. And that is a question of how much cash they're going to give you. It isn't a question of, it isn't a question about how many analysts are going to recommend it or what the volume in the stock is or what the chart looks like or anything. It's a question of how much cash it's going to give you. That's the only reason. It's true if you're buying a farm. It's true if you're buying an apartment house. Any financial asset. Oil in the ground, you're laying out cash now to get more cash back later on. And the question is how much are you going to get, when are you going to get it, and how sure are you? And when I calculate intrinsic value of a business, when we buy businesses, and whether we're buying all of a business or a little piece of a business, I always think we're buying the whole business because that's my approach to it. I look at it and say, what will come out of this business and when? And what you really like, of course, is them to be able to use the money they earn and earn higher returns on it as you go along. I mean, Berkshire has never distributed anything to its shareholders, but its ability to distribute goes up as the value of the businesses we own increases. We can compound it internally, but the real question is, Berkshire selling for, we'll say, 105 or so billion now. What can we distribute from that 100? If you're going to buy the whole company for 105 billion now, can we distribute enough cash to you soon enough to make it sensible at present interest rates to lay out that cash now? And that's what it gets down to. And if you can't answer that question, you can't buy the stock. You can gamble in the stock if you want to, or your neighbors can buy it. But if you don't answer that question, and I can't answer that for internet companies, for example. There are a lot of companies, there are all kinds of companies I can't answer it for, but I just stay away from those.
It's funny that these simple principles of Warren Buffett, that if stuck to over the long term, make such a high return. But that's the hard thing that so few investors are capable of, and that is being rational, sticking to these guidelines, and not giving in to our emotions. Few will be able to do so, but those few will be the ones who make the high returns.
They did ask that we might start off with talking about sort of what got us here. And it's pretty simple in my case. It's not IQ. I'm sure you'll all be glad to hear that. But everybody in this room has more IQ than they need to do my job. The big thing is rationality. And in other words, I always look at IQ and talent as sort of representing the horsepower of the motor, but then in terms of the output, the efficiency with which the motor works, that depends on rationality, because a lot of people start out with 400 horsepower motors and get 100 horsepower of output, and it's way better to have a 200 horsepower motor and get it all into output. And so why do smart people do things that interfere with really getting the output they're entitled to? And it's it gets into the habits and the character and the temperament, and it really gets into behaving in a rational manner and not getting in your own way. As I say, everybody here has the ability absolutely to do anything I do and much beyond. And some of you will and some of you won't. But it will, the ones that won't, it will be because you get in your own way. It won't because the world doesn't allow you to. It will be because you don't allow yourself to. So I have one little suggestion for you. Pick out the person in the class that you admire the most, and then write down why you admire them. Put down a list of qualities. You're not to name yourself in this. And then put down the one that frankly you could stand the least in the whole group, and put down the qualities that turn you off in that person, and look at that list, and you won't find it's a bunch of things like throwing a football 70 yards or anything of the sort. The qualities of the first one that you admire are qualities that you, with a little practice, can make your own, and which, if practiced, will become habit forming. The chains of habit are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be broken. I mean, my age, I can't change any of my habits. I mean, I'm stuck. But at your age, you will have the habits 20 years from now that you decide to put into practice today. So I just suggest that you look at the habits you admire in others, or the behavior you admire in others, and make those your own habits, and you look at what you really find somewhat reprehensible in others, and just decide, those are things you're not going to do. Ben Franklin did that a few hundred years ago, and it still works today. And if you do that, you'll find that you convert all your horsepower into output. So you ought to be happy where you are working. And I always worry about people who say, I'm going to do this for 10 years. I really don't like it very well, and then I'll do 10 more years of this. I mean, that's a little like saving up sex for your old age. I mean, not a very good idea.
When I started Microsoft, I didn't think of it as all that risky.
You've always got a job with me, Bill.
And the thing that was scary to me wasn't quitting and starting the company. It was when I started hiring my friends, and they expected to be paid.
And I don't like, that's the only thing. Other than I tap dance to work, and I get down there and I think I'm supposed to lie on my back and paint the ceiling, or something like Michelangelo. I mean, that's the way I feel, and it doesn't diminish. It's tremendous fun. So, if they say that success is getting what you want and happiness is wanting what you get. Well, I don't know which one applies in this case, but I do know that I wouldn't be doing anything else. I mean, I do advise you, when you go out to work, go to work for an organization that you admire, people you admire, because it'll turn you on, and you ought to be happy where you are working. And I always worry about people who say, I'm going to do this for 10 years. I really don't like it very well, and I'll do 10 more years of this. I mean, that's a little like saving up sex for your old age. I mean, not a very good idea. So get right into what you enjoy, and you'll be successful at it. You really will. I mean, you won't be able to miss. And that's. I don't regard what I do as the most important thing in the world at all, but it's right for me. I mean, I happen to be wired in a certain way that what I do works in this. If I had to do what Bill does, I mean, it lasts about 10 minutes, and that's true of a lot of things. But luckily, I kind of stumbled into the thing that I do best, and that it's worked out well. Bill?
Well, I think that the key point there is you've got to enjoy what you do every day. And for me, that's working with very smart people. It's working on new problems. Every time we think, hey, we've had a little bit of success, we're pretty careful not to dwell on it too much, because the bar gets raised. People's expectations of the products, we've always got customer feedback telling us the machines are too complicated, they're not natural enough. And the competition, the breakthroughs, the research make the field I'm in, I think, the most exciting field there is. There's some other good fields. Biotechnology is a good field because it's changing the world of medicine and health. But the computer industry, in particular software, I think is the most exciting, and I think I have the best job in that business.
So my job, I really have just two functions in my job. One is to allocate capital, which I enjoy doing, and the second one is to have a group of managers, to keep a group of people, 15 or 20 managers, enthused about what they do when they have no financial need to do it whatsoever. At least 3/4 of the managers we have are rich beyond any possible financial need, and therefore my job is to figure out how to cause them to want to jump out of bed at 6 in the morning and work with all of the enthusiasm they did when they were poor and starting. And if I do those two things, they do the innovation. So the bill.
Well, I was lucky that I got started early. I mean, it always helps if you get started early. And my dad happened to be in the investment business, so I would go down to his office on Saturdays. And so at age probably 7 or something, I started reading these books that were around the place. And so I had a 15-year jump on many people in a sense, and that helped a lot. And I was always fascinated by it. I mean, I knew what I wanted to do early, and I think that's a huge advantage too. And then you don't need a lot of brains in this business. I mean, I've always said if you got an IQ of 160, give away 30 points to somebody else because you don't need it in investments. What you do need is emotional stability. You have to be able to think independently, and you have to be when you come to a conclusion, you have to really not care what other people say and just follow the facts and follow your reasoning. And that's tough for a lot of people. That part I think I was just lucky with. I was born that way. I can't really tell you the answer. I mean, I didn't learn in school or anything. It never bothered me if people disagreed with what I thought, as long as I felt I knew the facts. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things I don't know a thing about. I just stay away from those. So I stay within what I call my circle of competence. And Tom Watson said it best. He said, I'm no genius, but I'm smart in spots, and I stay around those spots. Well, I try and stay around those spots, and I just don't have a problem if somebody says, you're wrong on something. I go back and look at the facts, and I think that really is much more important, frankly, than having a few points of IQ or having an extra course or two in school or anything of the sort. You need emotional stability. And that's a little bit like, I've got this rule, the first rule is don't lose, and the second rule is never forget the first rule. So it really isn't so much having a lot of brilliant decisions. It's just not really having some terrible ones. And frankly, I did learn from Ben Graham how to avoid ever having any disasters in investments. It wasn't that you were going to come up with the very smartest thing, but if you never have any significant losses, some singles and doubles will produce a lot of runs before you get through.
Aside from the things I've talked about already, it's really who you associate with. You want to associate with people that are better than you are. I mean, basically, you'll go in the direction of the people that you associate with, and you want to have the right heroes. You want people. If you want to emulate somebody, you better pick very carefully who you want to emulate. And when obviously you can't pick your parents. They're going to have an enormous influence on you, but you don't get a choice on that. But you get choices as you go down the line, and who you admire, who you want to copy, and the most important for most people in terms of that decision is their spouse. It's also important in terms of a partner in business, but the partner in life is the most important. I like numbers. Started before I could remember. It just felt good working with numbers. I was always playing around with numbers in one way or another, and it was fun to have a bunch of guys over and have them betting on which marble would reach the drain first. I had a lot of energy as a kid. I was inquisitive, and I was the youngest one always in the class because I'd skip. I've always been competitive. I like to read more than most kids. I really like to read a lot. My Aunt Edie gave me a copy of the World Almanac
And that was heaven to me. And I can still tell you that the almost population was 214,006 in 1930. Some numbers just kind of stick with you. And very early, probably when I was 7 or so, I took this book out of the Benson Library called 1,000 Ways to Make $1,000. And one of the ways in this book was having penny weighing machines. And I sat and calculated how much it would cost to buy the first weighing machine and then how long it would take for the profit for that one to buy another one. And I would sit there and create these compound interest tables to figure out how long it would take me to have a weighing machine for every person in the world. I had everybody in the country weighing themselves 10 times a day, and me just sitting there like John D. Rockefeller weighing machines. The allowance when I was a little boy was a nickel a week, but I liked the idea of having a little more than a nickel a week to work with, and I went into business very early. I started selling Coca-Cola door to door. I sold gum door to door, or sold Saturday Evening Post, Liberty Magazine, Ladies Home Journal, you name it. I think I enjoyed the game almost right from the start. But I like being my own boss. That's one thing I liked about delivering papers. I could arrange the route I wanted. Nobody was bothering me at 5 or 6 in the morning. I was delivering 500 papers a day, and I made a penny a paper, but in terms of compounding, that penny turned into something else. Einstein is reputed to have said that compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world or something like that. And it goes back to that story you probably learned when you were in grade school, where somebody did something for the king, and the king said, "What can I do for you?" And he said, "Well, let's take a chessboard and put 1 kernel of wheat on the first square, and then double it on the second, and double it on the third." And the king readily agreed to it, and by the time he figured out what 2 to the 64th amounted to, he was giving away the entire kingdom. So it's a pretty simple concept, but over time, it accomplishes extraordinary things.